Your novel, Aukati, set in Taranaki and Wellington, but not Newtown. But it should just work, apparently, if you hold it up.
There's no shiny light, but kia ora.
Here. And you're living in Thorndon at the moment, and you're about to move up to Auckland. But, yeah, you've hung out in Wellington a bit, so hopefully hung out a bit in Newtown.
I have, yeah.
Good. Yeah. That's good news. So like Rachel, you've written a couple of stories you've shared with me set in Newtown, but again, you don't say Newtown in the stories. But to you, when you were writing them, they were set there?
Yes,
set here?
Absolutely. Firstly, thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm so happy to be here. And when I say I'm genuinely grateful to be here with these authors, I really mean it. I came back from Australia with my whānau earlier this year, and it was a bit of a crazy flight back, actually. We were surrounded by bushfires in Australia, where we'd bought a house outside of Melbourne, and we had intended to come back for mid-year, but then, of course, everything happened. So I always say to the Randall Cottage Trust in particular that I am possibly the most grateful person to be at the cottage ever in the history of the cottage. We're so happy to be in Wellington. Yes, so
when did you write these stories?
So these are quite old stories, actually. I always say that Newtown is my spiritual home in Wellington. I lived here, I've probably lived in half a dozen different houses in Newtown, and I fell in love in Newtown with the person who I'm still with today, amazingly. We lived in a flat on Daniel Street that before we'd lived there had been, I think, a mongrel mob house. One of my flatmates was an animal activist who frequently was trespassed from all of the supermarkets for yelling at people with a megaphone about eating meat. We were all sort of various stages of vegan or vegetarian, and we had like a lot of compost and a rat that took up residence in our kitchen who would just boldly walk across the floor. It was a wonderful time. We were all art students, so it was, it's a golden time in my memory. But I wrote these stories, and this is a fascinating conversation because as everyone was speaking, I was thinking my stories that I wrote when I was a younger writer, they are quite non-specific, and I think I read in that this urge to obfuscate the specific, and I do think it's something about coming of age as a writer in Aotearoa. You almost internalise this cultural cringe, and I'd like to think it's not such a strong thing today, but you tend to read widely and you look to the old centres. And this was very obvious to me when I moved to Australia, and I realised that there's so little exchange between Australian literature and New Zealand literature. It's quite shocking. Like they know who a few of us are, but they really don't know very well who many of us are. And I met a writer called Christos Tsiolkas, who's a Greek writer, who wrote The Slap, and he said to me, our centres are not the old centres, so we need to start writing from our own places. And so I think what I'm doing at the moment is just full-on specificity. I'm putting all of the names, all of the places into my current work. So yeah, these stories are quite old, but they are recognisably in Newtown.
Well, in fact, because it was Irene Beautray, your very good friend, who told me about them, because she reckons she's in one of them. Is she in the skip bin one? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because she's written a poem about going into skip bins of food, and her first collection of poetry, right? So I suddenly thought that'll be her, because she clearly goes into skip bins. Is that right?
That wasn't Irene, no. But she's in the other story. She's in the other excerpt. So Irene Beautray is a very dear friend of mine, And I hardly ever have a character in a story who is just literally a person, like it's not done and it's not something I do. But this character has a line that Irene said to me a really long time ago, which I'll read out in a moment, but she said, I would have been good in the Depression, because she's like incredibly crafty and she recycles everything. And I just thought that was such a great line. So I did acknowledge her, I think, when I published that story. Yeah.
In your e-book of stories that won an award in Australia, I've forgotten the name of the award, but it was very cool. What's it called?
The Carmel Bird Digital Literary Award, which is why you've forgotten it.
Yeah. It was right on the tip of my tongue, but thanks for that. So Apologia is the name of the collection. Are all those stories set in Australia or some here? Or?
No, they're set variously in Aotearoa, in Outback Australia, in Melbourne, in Southeast Asia. But actually quite a few stories from here that were set here. And I thought that was extremely interesting because the publisher obviously was quite adventurous. The prize was for a work that represented Australia, like this is a work of Australian writing. So I kind of thought that was a gesture towards a more Pacifica kind of writing. So that was really interesting. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well done. Well, would you like to read you're going to read us a little bit out of each of those stories? Yeah, cool. Here he comes. This is Neil again, who's bringing the mic stand. About my height. I think that'll be right for you, don't you think? Are you happy with that? Or?
How's that? This first story is this is an excerpt, I'm afraid, from a story called Summer of Love, which was published on Turbine quite a while ago. And this is the story which is set, I'd be specific with it now, so it's literally on Daniel Street. Yeah. It was a summer of love. This meant we put the couch on the roof of the garage and sat on it, drinking beer and eating lentil burgers and vegetarian nachos and salads with seeds in them, and watching the street lights take over from the slow leaving light at 9 o'clock at night. It meant noise control notices lined up on the wall by the stove, one after the other like awards. It meant I began to run every time I needed to go to the kitchen. I ran down the long wood-floored hallway instead of walking. I ran loudly and as fast as I could with a noise like thunder. No one cared. I was walking one night with a guy whose T-shirt said, "Heat the poor, burn out the rich," when we passed some clothing bins. All of a sudden he stopped still, like a cat who's caught a scent. And then there's a little interval where this group of young people go bin diving, which used to be a very popular activity. I'm not sure if it still is. And they're caught by the police. The police, pigs. They were men with flashlights. They trained them on us and we froze in the beams of light. I peered through the flap and one of them saw me. "Get out of there," he said. I made a noise like a balloon. I heard it. It was a sound like all the air went out of me at once. He put his big hand through the flap and grabbed my wrist. All I could see was the light in my eyes, which is actually exactly what's happening right now. Sorry, I'm really squinting a lot. It's very good. Okay, I said. It took me a while to climb out. I landed in a pile of clothes awkwardly, banging my ankle on a foot bar. A mellow girl was standing in front of a cop with the posture of someone chewing gum. "We weren't doing anything," she said. There were 3 of them, 2 cars. They were all big, all of them. They looked like they were overfed on beef and lamb. They had batons, and that gave me a small thrill. Actual weapons. The one who grabbed me had a kind face. He looked at me in a worried way with something like concern. "You know," the mellow girl was saying, "these places only give 5% to the charities anyway." Her policeman was staring at her quietly, his hand to his belt, like he might have to cuff her any minute. So I was just down here, I said to my kind-faced cop, and I was donating some clothes. At 10 o'clock at night, he said. The kindness went out of his face then, that look that was something about how he had a daughter my age or a girlfriend who used to be kind of wild or something. All the humour went out of his face, like water from a squeezed sponge. I'm very busy during the days, I said. Oh, I'm sure you are, my officer said. No.
Just a bit. Give us a bit. Yeah.
Okay. This is from Michalia, which is the short story collection that Mary was referring to. And this is recognisably in, I think it's Ridderford Street in Newtown. And the characters in this story are very Newtown. So it's about Belle, who's a circus performer, and a lighting expert who likes to shave her head. The day Belle saw her father was the day we became best friends. Belle was a circus performer. We'd met at the women's circus where I was doing lighting and she was on trapeze. Everyone loved Belle. She was cute and small and neat, and she flipped and somersaulted on the bar like nothing I'd ever seen. The day we met her father, she'd come round to my house for a cup of tea. I'd been stenciling words onto T-shirts. Did you know there's a free box at the op shop down the road? I asked. I had a look yesterday. There's heaps of free material. Belle grinned. We should totally go check it out. The day outside was clear and still. It seemed earlier than it was, like the air wasn't dirtied by other people's breathing yet. There was no wind. The blossoms were coming out on the trees along my street, and we heard a howler monkey call as we left the house from the zoo one street away. Even the council flats at the end of the road looked clean and crisp, lucid in the light. Someone had sprayed graffiti on the wall. It could be worse, you could be on fire. And I think I'll stop there. Does anyone remember that phrase, being on the wall? It could be worse, you could be on fire. I thought it was so great. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.